You start. Okay, so a starting point for the discussion today will be, I think anyone who learns goes through Sefer Bereshis. We talk about Avram Avinu and Sarah Avinu. We talk about Yitzchak Avinu and Rivka. We talk later about Yaakov and Rachel and Leah and and Bill and Zilpah. There's a huge difference when you look at Yitzchak and Rivka's relationship and you compare it to Avram and Sarah's. Or, for that matter, Yaakov and Rachel Imenu's. What would the difference be? There's an obvious difference. What would that difference be?
What was the question, I'm sorry?
Difference in relationships. When you look at Yitzchak Avinu and Rivka Imenu, you compare them to Avram and Sarah before and Yaakov and Rachel after, it's a very different type of relationship. How is it different?
Based on themselves.
Avram and Sarah grew together and
with themselves, no one else to guide them.
and sort of worked together and balanced one another out. Yaakov and Rachel grew together and balanced one another out.
Yitzchak was more gevura.
Yitzchak was stronger in the relationship, and you see it in 1,000 ways, right? But how do you see it? Where do you see that Yitzchak was stronger? Come, let's do this together. Where do you see that Yitzchak was stronger? But it's not just this week's parsha.
I know,
It's actually, this is not primarily this week's parsha. At that point, where do you see that Yitzchak was stronger? What?
Wanting to keep Esav in the house.
Right.
Well,
So
Avram did the same thing with Yeshua until Hashem said,
but how did it evolve? Yitzchak wanted to keep Esav in the house, right? And Rivka felt that no, Yaakov should be. I don't know if she felt that Esav should be expelled. Well, let's see where it goes. Rivka felt otherwise. Rivka felt that Yaakov is the one who should dominate. Yaakov is strong. Yaakov is the one who should lead. Yaakov is the one who should yarshin. So what did Rivka do to sort of make that happen? How did Rivka make her dream happen? She felt that for the future of Klal Yisrael, it's better that Yaakov yarshin, that Esav, the Bechor be taken away from Esav. Truth is, Yaakov had bought the Bechor anyway. Yaakov was taking something that was that he had a right to. So how did she do it? How did she arrange? Through deception, through trickery. Now the truth is that needs a long discussion because you can't steal a bracha. A wife is going to trick her husband. I mean, I have a wife, right? You don't live that way. You don't function that way, right? So it's hard to say that it was trickery. It might be easier to say that Rivka was doing, or maybe that Yitzchak even realized what she was doing. If you look at the story there, sure. I'm being taped, so can I still quote Shakespeare when I'm taped? Yeah. Shakespeare has a famous saying, right? Methinks the damsel protesteth too much. When a person says something too much, it means that they know what's going on and there's something going on. Yitzchak keeps saying, is this Yaakov? You sound like Yaakov. Are you my son Esav? Yitzchak may have known. There's a Rashi, there are a number of Scheiner that say that Yitzchak realized midstream that he was giving the bracha to Yaakov, and it's really what he wanted. Yitzchak had felt pressure to give the bracha to Esav because Esav was older. Yitzchak, the Ibn Ezra, felt pressure to give the bracha to Esav because Esav was the one who kept the family running. Yitzchak had lost his money. Esav was the one who was a hunter. So there was a lot of pressure, and Yitzchak didn't want to hurt Esav. But when the solution came and Yaakov was taking the bracha, Yitzchak might have run with it. But that's another discussion. That's not for now.
What does mean when he was trembling? What does that mean? You have to answer that.
Because he looked back and he realized, according to Shamshon Hirsch speaks about it, he looked back and he realized that all these years Esav had duped him. He realized that he had been wrong and Rivka had been right.
That's very nice.
That's for sure. But why should I say something you know, right? So there's really no point. But I want to get back to this. Yitzchak feels that Yaakov should. I don't know if there was a question about Yaakov leaning. Yitzchak Avinu. He recognized who Yaakov was. The question was just how much power do you shift to Yaakov? How much power do you take away from Esav? Yitzchak felt one way. Rivka felt another way. So how does Rivka make her dream come to fruition? It seems to be dissembling. She doesn't talk to Yitzchak. There's no discussions with Yitzchak. She talks to Yaakov. Present yourself. Make it seem like you're Esav. And this way you'll get the bracha. Maybe Yitzchak realized. Maybe Yitzchak didn't realize. Maybe her objective was to show Yitzchak something. But you don't see a conversation with Yitzchak. This is a point of major tension, right? There's children. Who leads the family? But you don't see Rivka talking to Yitzchak. Tell me, do you have similar discussions with the other avos? Similar situations with the other avos?
Trickery and that type of stuff?
Not trickery, where they disagree about what to do.
Yosef and the brothers.
By? Oh, yes, well, Rachel might have been dead there, so that would be a very interesting discussion, but let's put that aside because one wife is dead. Let's go back to Avram. By Avram, Sarah, Yishmael. Yishmael feels that Sarah feels that Yishmael should be sent away again. You have to know what she was doing. Again, this is a tzitkanis. This is Sarah Imenu. She's not throwing him out. But according to the Ramban, Yishmael is saying, I'm going to yashin. He can't yashin because then he's going to lead Klal Yisrael. So there's a ceremony in the ancient world where if a child, you wanted a disinherited child, you would do it. Today you go to a lawyer. You couldn't go to a lawyer in the ancient world because nothing was filed away. There was a ceremony when you sent a child out. This way he did not inherit. But Yishmael eventually rejoined the family. You see that. Because by the Kfura, Yishmael is burying Avram Avinu. So Sarah felt that Yishmael should be sent away. What? Yishmael buries Avram Avinu. He's part of the family. He's part of the family. The other children aren't. Avram Avinu had different children with Hagar later. They're not part of the family.
Deutsch has a very nice piece on this. Very nice on the whole perspective.
For sure, there's so much here. But let's come back to this core idea here, right?
I just read it today.
So Yitzchak Avinu and Rivka Imenu disagree, and they disagree about how to raise the children. And you're dealing with really weighty issues. Does Esav lead, or does Esav have some capacity to lead, or does Esav get the special bracha, or does he not? Does it go to Yaakov? Avram Avinu and Sarah Avinu have the exact same disagreement. Yishmael is the older son, just the way Esav is the older son. Yitzchak is the younger son, just the way Yaakov is the younger son. Sarah feels that Yishmael needs to be sent away, disinherited. Again, he's not thrown into the garbage. He's sent away. It's a ceremony where you say, this child is not the one who's going to lead. Avram says, no, we shouldn't do this. So what does Sarah do? She speaks to Avram Avinu in a very direct way. She says, Chamasi alecha, something that I have a right to was stolen, and it's your fault. I want you to do something. And there's a discussion back and forth. There's tension, but it's healthy tension. What is tension? Tension is this: two people are working through something together. One says one thing, one says another thing, and they come to a conclusion together, but they talk it through. You don't see Rivka Imenu and Yitzchak Avinu talking it through. You see Sarah and Avram talking it through. That's when you go back a generation. Go a generation ahead. Talk about Yaakov and the main wife Rachel. So later on, when there's questions over the children, Rachel has passed on already, so they can't be discussing this. But there's tension earlier on. What is the tension about?
Rachel challenges Yaakov.
When does she challenge him? Right? So Rachel isn't having children. And Rachel says in a very forcefully, Havali banim, give me children. Now again, it's very difficult not to have a child, and she's forceful.
So
and
what her perspective was, the whole thing is very...
Right, so that each of these stories needs discussion. But the key issue here for today's discussion is that in every relationship between a husband and a wife, between regular people and Avos and Imos, there are going to be different perspectives. There are going to be points of disagreement. There's going to be points of tension. Avram Avinu had this with Sarah Imenu. Yitzchak had this with Rachel, Yitzchak had this with Rivka, and Yaakov had this with Rachel. When Avram Avinu has it with Sarah, there's open disagreement. It doesn't mean that these are obviously not fighting, but they're talking it through. They're disagreeing. One is saying one, one's saying another.
Isn't what the disagreement is mahalach? Isn't that really what
Well,
it is?
you have to understand. Right, but you have to understand why it is. Why we see Avram and Sarah talking it through. Why we see Yitzchak and Rachel talking it through, even though there's tension, it's weighty, it's difficult. Why we don't see Yitzchak and Rivka talking this through? A lot of this goes back to a Netziv, and the Netziv is based on a very curious story in this week's parsha. So come with me to this week's parsha. Okay, let's. And again, I have source sheets. Let's go through them. Okay.
Very nice.
Okay. So the Netziv says, okay, Avram Avinu and Sarah Imenu are disagreeing about what to do with Yishmael. Sarah is very forceful. V'toimas Sarayel Avram chamasi alecha. My role, my rights, my child's standing was stolen, and it's your fault. I allowed you to establish a relationship with my shivcha, and it came back to bite me. Tera kirasa, you saw that she became pregnant. Ekel beinea, and I'm just not treated appropriately. I've been demoted. Yishput Hashem b'nei v'necha. Let HaKadosh Baruch Hu judge. Now again, you have to know the context. She says, speak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Let HaKadosh Baruch Hu offer perspective. But I'm offering my perspective.
Sarah gave Hagar to Avram.
Right.
Nobody complains.
Right. So she had a valid point, but Avram's saying, but the fact of the matter, the child was born, he's my child. And in a certain sense, he's also your child. Because when Sarah gave Hagar to Avram to have a child, it was really a
surrogate.
It was
Surrogate.
here.
Yeah, we learned it last week here.
Okay, and she had, and the child was really defined by Sarah. We sort of forget, Yishmael is sort of not viewed as part of the family. But Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher were exactly like Yishmael. Yishmael was born to a shifcha who married the husband. Bill and Zilpah were in the same exact situation.
Yaakov had the freedom, otherwise the shifting car are avodim. That doesn't. One-on-one's not
Well, so maybe Hagar was also freed. It says that it makes it sound as if there's no difference whatsoever. And they're really the same. So there are slight differences, but it's why Yishmael was thrown out and why Dan and Naphtali have full standing as members of Kol Yisrael needs to be discussed. But Sarah is very, very assertive. And it's not just that Sarah is assertive. Avram Avinu negotiates with Sarah. Let me share one interesting case. There are two stories where they're the exact same story. Avram Avinu takes one approach, Yitzchak takes another approach. There's famine in Eretz Yisrael. Now people don't die, at least not in North America. There's wealth, food is preserved, there's storage. In the ancient world, if there was famine, people died. They starved to death. And when they starved to death, the husband died first, the wife was sold into slavery, she was turned into who knows what. It was a terrible situation. So Avram Avinu had to leave Eretz Yisrael, and Yitzchak Avinu had to leave Eretz Yisrael. And they left with their wives, and those were horrible times and horrible places. And if you went to a foreign land, and if a woman was attractive, the king said, I want her. He would take her, and he would force himself on her. And there was nothing she could do, there was nothing the husband can do. And he would force himself on the wife, and to just make it clean and simple, he would just kill the husband. It was normal, it was expected, it was no big deal, right? Avram Avinu confronted this situation, and Yitzchak confronted this situation. So what does Avram Avinu do when he's approaching Mitzrayim and he knows that Sarah might be violated? So what does he tell Sarah? He says, do me a favor. I mean, it's a terrible situation. We can't stay in Canaan because there's starvation. Going here is very dangerous. In all probability, it's going to be okay, or you wouldn't have done it. But they might try to abduct you. They might try to violate you. And if they know that I'm your husband, they will violate you and they will kill me. So what should you do? What does he tell Sarah to do? He says, lie. Say that I'm your brother, not your husband. Okay? Second side of the page, source 11. Okay? I realize now you're an attractive woman. It's creating dilemmas. The Egyptians are going to see you. Say that you're my sister. It'll be better. We'll survive. Yitzchak Avinu and Rivka are in the same exact situation. Okay? Come with me. 14. Come read it. Okay? These are Pesukei Chumash. So they're going to Gerar. 14, Gerar. And it's interesting, it was a less terrible situation because Gerar, the Plishtim were a little more civilized, were a little less carnal. So V'yishav Yitzchak Gerar, V'yishalu, well, they're not the Plishtim, the Arabs. V'yishalu on she'yamakam lishta v'yamrei chaysehi. Yitzchak Avinu doesn't ask Rivka. He does it without asking her. It's really the same thing. With Avram and Sarah, there are negotiations. Whether it's something difficult like sending a child away, whether it's something difficult like a woman being put in a position where she might be violated, there are discussions. Avram Avinu says, work with me, I want to hear your perspective. She insists on sharing her perspective, and they come to a conclusion. With Yitzchak and Rivka, you don't see discussion. You see Yitzchak doing what he thinks is right. He doesn't discuss it with Rivka. Not when it comes to speaking to the king. He just says, she's my sister. He doesn't discuss it with Rivka. And not when it comes to the sons. Yitzchak wants to give the bracha to Esav. Rivka thinks it's wrong. But Yitzchak is going to do it anyway. He's not discussing it with Rivka. How does Rivka have her point of view come through? Chicanery, trickery, gnevus habrachas, this whole complicated situation.
There's no talk.
But there's no talk. Between Yitzchak and Rivka, you don't see talk. Between Avram and Sarah, you see talk. And between Yaakov and Rachel later you see talk. Why is there no talk between Yitzchak and Rivka?
I never heard that question asked.
It's there in the pasuk.
No, it's amazing. I never heard this question asked.
Okay, so why?
It doesn't mean one's better or one's worse.
I'm not saying it's better or worse.
Amazing.
I would venture to say it is better to talk it through with your wife because it just works. But
And each situation is different. And
It's a little surprising that Yitzchak, who was his father, he didn't learn from that. I mean, that's pretty crazy.
so why is it this way? How did it happen this way?
He
Clearly,
used the same tactic of saying she's my sister, no?
he did, but without discussing it with her. There's no discussion. He doesn't ask her. He does it. So if we be just that case, you would say, well, we're repeating the pattern of the father. But you have the Yishmael Yitzchak case, and the Yaakov, you have the Yishmael Yitzchak and the Yaakov Esav, where again there are differences.
Yitzchak came from Avram. Rivka did not come from that. He came from...
So let me share an interesting
Something like
Netziv, a very surprising Netziv. The Netziv says, let me share the Netziv first, and then I'll go back to the Psukim that back it up. The Netziv says, how far apart were Avram and Sarah in age? 10 years, right? Okay, that's not the end. How far apart were Yitzchak and Rivka? Depends who you ask, right? According to the classic, it's 37 years, right? Some say 26. Different. Well, now.
Rivka was like 3, but her intelligence was...
Well, but again, when there's a 37-year gap in age between husband and wife, and the husband is 40 and the wife is 3, or the wife is 14, according to the Ibn Ezra. Right, but there's a gap in age. Not only is there a gap in age, where did...
She was 3?
No, a lot of Rishonim, because it's very difficult to read the story. She was 3. There's a very sophisticated lady. They're negotiating, discussing things. Taisa says she was 14. Ibn Ezra maybe. No,
we
it's
can
not
say the same
Pasha.
thing. Avram realizes Hashem at 3 also.
I mean, it's very difficult to see a 3-year-old doing all this.
But that seems like that.
Yeah, so certainly, I mean, Rashi brings it down. That's the classic Chazal. But a lot of Rishonim take the Chazal as a metaphor. They say 14. They just
14, really?
it's just very difficult to see a 3-year-old functioning that way. Very.
Think about it now.
It doesn't make any
Stop and
sense.
think about
What?
it for a
Even those
second.
days,
How do we understand the giants
Three
and
still
people
three.
gone at certain age,
Yeah,
100 years
I
old?
don't know that things were so, but that's another discussion.
Teva back then. It
But
was
that's
a different time.
okay. So yes, another piece to the puzzle. Avram Avinu and Sarah Imenu grew up in the same world, right? They both grew up in Assyria, Mesopotamia, that world of Babel, wherever, that world of Aram Naraim, Choran, Nachor, where they grew up in, and they grew up in the same world, and they immigrated. They came to Eretz Yisrael together. Rivka left her world to join Yitzchak's world, which means she had no support, she had no family. I'm not even sure how much language she had, remember? Because even though, people now, you go with English, you go from here to England but it's not the way the world then was. Language was very, very localized because there was no radio, there was no communication. So once you left your 5 miles, the language changed a lot. Anyone been in England, in England, even to this very day, the north of England, the south, the language is very different because way back when, people didn't travel so much, so language developed differently. So she was much younger, she had no support, she came from a much poor world religiously, right? She came from a banditin, right? And she was joining aristocracy. So she was much weaker than Yitzchak. Much, much weaker. Now, let's try to understand. In a relationship, when one person is stronger and one person is weaker, what happens? One person is stronger. It's not necessarily bad, but one person will be stronger. Avram Avinu and Sarah Imenu were sort of the same. Similar age, similar background, both growing together, going to Eretz Yisrael. Rivka was joining Yitzchak's world, vastly younger, maybe with little language, no support network, no family, no standing. She was chosen to marry the aristocrat, but she was much weaker. It was a relationship not of equals, but of one stronger person, one weaker
Avram
person.
and Sarah had no backup also.
What?
Avram and Sarah had no backup. Who do they...
Right, but they were the same. They were the same. So Avram wasn't stronger. They were the same religiously, they were the same age-wise, they were the same linguistically, they were the same culture, they were the same. Rivka was weaker than Yitzchak in every which way. Age-wise. So Yaakov and Rachel, it was the opposite. Yaakov might have been weaker than Rachel, or Rachel might have been weaker than Yaakov. Yaakov traveled to Rachel's world, so he was sort of subsumed in her world. In a way, he was weaker, but then she came to his world. I don't know what the gap in age is. We don't know. Simple readings was tremendous, but again, you don't have this clarity.
When she saw Yitzchak for the first time, she fell off.
And that is the Netziv. That's going to be today's discussion.
She was overwhelmed.
Baruch Shekivanta. So let's start with the Netziv. The Netziv says something. Says there's a pasuk that has
She's on the same level. Why is she getting so overwhelmed?
Why is the pasuk? So the Netziv is why the pasuk tells us this. So at the end of the parsha, we read about.
You would freak. If Rashi
right.
Would be like, oh, Shalom Aleichem, how are you?
right. You're right. So the pasuk, okay. So turn to the first side of the sheet. Pasuk tells us one. Vatisra v'kaseneah. She's coming to meet her husband. Vatipol me'al gamel. She falls off the camel or on the camel, and then on top of that she covers herself. Now again, everything the Torah tells us is a reason. So it's simply an instinctive reaction, like, what are we learning from this? Like, why does the Torah tell us this? Right? The Torah has X number of letters and words. It tells us only things that are important. Well, why is it important? Why is it recorded? So Rashi tells you, Vatipol, Hishmit Atzma, maybe she didn't fall down, she lowered herself, whatever it means, but she lowered herself. What's going on here? What is this about? So a lot of Rishonim say it's tznius. There's a radak. Limda derech eretz tznius. Look at the radak 3. Shiroi li shalovash merosas. It's very interesting. The radak says it's not about a woman not being seen by another man, but specifically by the man she's engaged to, because there should be special tznius, and it makes sense. Because a person is liboy gas with his oris when they're engaged, there's more of a potential for impropriety. So there's special reason for tznius. But the Radak says it's specifically because they're engaged. And indeed, when Yaakov meets Rachel the first time, what does Rachel do? She doesn't cover herself and she doesn't put on a tzif. He kisses her. So why he kisses her is another discussion that needs to share into itself. But that's the pasuk. Vayishak Yaakov l'Rachel, vayisa koyle vayef. Right? You can't translate it another way. What? Right. So maybe she was a child. She probably was a child, because Yaakov says we're going to wait 7 years until you get married. Back then, as soon as a girl reached puberty, when she was 12, she got married. What does the Gemara in Ksuba say? If she's already a Bagera, she's 12 and a half, she's unmarried, the father's having a nervous breakdown. 12 and a half. So she was probably 7 years, she was probably a little girl. And this way he'd be able to wait without it being a problem. And this way kissing her isn't such an issue, because she's a little girl, maybe. But the point is that, each of these is a discussion. But what's critical is that she lowers herself and she covers herself with a tzif, with a shmat of some sort. Why is she doing this? So the Netziv says, because she felt so insignificant. He's much older. He's the Gadol Adar. She's going to his world. She has no support. She has no background. Maybe she has no language. Here, she's so weak, and she's so completely controlled. She just feels insignificant. And the Netziv says this was the pattern for the relationship they had for the rest of their life. This imbalance now explains why the relationship they had for the rest of their life was one of imbalance. Where when Yitzchak makes a decision about saying that she's his sister rather than his wife, he doesn't talk to her. It's such a big thing, he should talk to her. Avram spoke to Sarah. Yitzchak is so much older, so much wiser, so much more attuned.
On his level, he should have.
I'm not saying it's. I'm not saying it's a critique of Yitzchak. That's another discussion. I'm not saying it's a critique of Yitzchak. The Netziv says this is the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted it. But it's sort of the way they live their lives. The Netziv says, very interesting, the Netziv is, I always tell people, the Netziv is an Achron who writes like a Rishon. He's contemporary, late 19th century. Very novel, though. His ideas are really not so much the ideas you see in Achronim, they're the ideas you Rishon. The Netziv says, this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted an imbalanced relationship, so that eventually when there's tension over Yaakov and Esav, who gets the bracha and who gets rights, Rivka won't talk to Yitzchak, and this way she'll engineer through Gnevus Brachas, because that's the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted it. Some would say it that way. Others would say that maybe it just evolved this way. Maybe it's not so clear that Yaakov stealing the brachas was so correct. There's a whole range.
That's the way to do it. Because Rivka married Yitzchak,
Right.
and in that way, this whole thing
So maybe
was
one
happening.
week I'll come back. Parshas tells we'll talk about Gnei Brachas, but there's a range of Rishonim and
Why
Achrayim
it
and
happened,
Midrashim.
because of this marriage.
But because of this marriage. But it was
It's not to say it wasn't a good.
100%. There's plenty of Midrashim actually that are very critical. They say Zok Achas, that Esav, the brachas was stolen, and Esav was upset and he screamed, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu paid us back with Haman.
Yeah.
So there's so many approaches that Yitzchak really just wanted to give Esav something small. There's many approaches. The dominant approach, though, was that Yaakov was right, and Yaakov was right because he was reclaiming something that was his, because he bought the brachos, and the Gnei Brachas might not have even been trickery. It might have been something that they all understood. But that's another discussion. Let's come back to the core issue here. The core issue is that the Netziv says this set the pattern that defined the relationship for the rest of the life. It's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted, but it's the pattern that defined the relationship for the rest of the life. Look at the Netziv. Netziv is 9 at the bottom. But Tikach HaTziv discussed. Netziv says Mireif Pachat. She was very Pachat, she was afraid. Busha, she was ashamed. K'may Mavina, Scheiner Elisha. She's not really worthy of this. He's Yitzchak Avinu. He is the most important person in the world. He's the one who's setting up Klal Yisrael L'Deri, and she's really nobody. And a little girl so much younger. Lias Elisha mi'az v'hala nikfa b'liva pachad. From that point on, there was a certain pachad, a certain fear in her heart. The relationship wasn't a relationship. Yitzchak and Sarah Avram. She didn't have the same relationship that her father-in-law and mother-in-law had. And for that matter, she didn't have the relationship that her son and daughter-in-law have, Rachel and Yaakov. There was something they were upset about. They spoke even forcefully. Masha'en came Rivka, and you see that. Sari Meinu tells Avram, Chamasi Alecha. And Rachel tells Yaakov Avinu something very similar. But it's very, very forceful. There's none. It explains why they had this disagreement, but there's no discussion. Now, the way the Netziv says it is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted it to be this way. But I will tell you, the Netziv says this defined the relationship in so many areas. So, two other cases the Netziv brings down. 15 on the second page and 17. 15 is, again, where Yitzchak Avinu goes down to Gror, goes down to the land of the Plishtim. He says, Rivka is my sister. He doesn't discuss it with her. Well, maybe he did, and the Torah doesn't mention it because Avram Avinu did. But that's not how the Netziv reads it. He didn't discuss it with her. Because she subjugated herself. It wasn't a relationship of equals. Okay, as I explained before. And then he brings one more raya, one more incident where you see something similar happening. After Gnei Brachas, Esav is so upset. And Esav says, I am going to kill Yaakov. And he means it. And Rivka hears. So what does Rivka do when she hears? She says, Yaakov has to leave. Because if he stays here, he's going to get killed. So go to my brother, you'll find a wife there, we'll wait, and eventually you'll come back. And so that's why she sends him. But what does she tell her husband? What does she tell Yitzchak? That's not what she tells Yitzchak. She says, come, look at the psukim. 16. Vayugad l'Rivka is divrei Esav and Agad. 16. Yaakov. She heard that Esav had threatened to kill Yaakov, and he meant it. She called Yaakov, told my love, hini Esav achicha, your brother misnachem l'chol argechi. He is thinking he's going to find the Haman killing you. Go. Atam nishma b'koili, brachelcha, run away. Don't stay here. V'yashaftima, you'll stay with him for a short while, and then eventually it'll settle, you'll come back. And it's going to be okay. But what does she tell Yitzchak? She doesn't tell Yitzchak that Esav is threatening Yaakov. She doesn't say that Yaakov has to flee. She says something very different. Memvav, the last part of 16. I don't like the local girls. I find them upsetting. If Yaakov marries one of the local girls, this is not what I want. Let him go to my brother. Let him marry an out-of-towner. The out-of-town girls are nicer. Okay, but why does she leave it out?
He doesn't want to get into a
discussion.
She can't.
Again, so that Netziv says it's the same thing, that the relationship was different. She doesn't tell Yitzchak exactly what happened. She changes the story. She's sending Yaakov because Esav is threatening him. What she tells her Yitzchak is, I'm sending Yaakov because I want an out-of-towner. They're sweeter.
They send out the better son. Yishmael, how we send out the bad son.
Right, so he wasn't being disinherited. He was just so look at the Netziv here. Bashalei Ratz to Lifka Leidili Yitzchak Rishas if you want to tell him about Tam Shabiyan. He says it's the reason that I explained before. So what you see here, what the Netziv tells you is you have this little story at the end of the parsha. It's there for a reason. Little stories aren't just there. That she fell down and she covered herself with it. So like, why are we telling you all this? Is it really it's tznius for an arusim? Maybe the Torah is telling you that. That's what some Rishonim say for sure. But maybe it's a message about the way the whole relationship evolved. There was such a disparity. He was so much stronger, so much older, so much wiser that Rivka was less. And that's the way it had to be. Yitzchak had to run the house in a different way than Avraham ran the house. The end result was there was less communication. Because of that, he decided when they came to Gror that she should be a sister. He decided she did not want to discuss with him when she was sending Yaakov away. It led to Gnevus HaBrachas. The Nitziv's reading is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted Gnevus HaBrachas to happen this way because that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. That's a discussion. But I will say, maybe one week we'll come back, but told us there's a whole range of approaches to what Gnevus HaBrachas is. Most validate Yaakov. Most say, and it's the Psukim. Psukim in the Torah are, Esav sells Yaakov the Bechorah. He means it, right? He didn't sell, you check the Rishonim, the Panei Raza, L'chiskuni, he didn't sell it for the beans. He sold it for money, but the beans that
Representation.
were a meal.
Does the Gemara talk about this?
I'm not sure that he sold it for money. A lot of Rishonim say you're going to sell something as valuable as b'chayr for a pot of beans. It doesn't make sense. It's not a valid sale. It's a mekach tov.
He just didn't care about it.
But if you don't care,
He didn't care, right? He didn't want to die.
that's
He said the Bechor is under the car.
right. So that already is medrash. But I will say a lot of Rishonim. The simplest reading is that he sold it for money. And back then, whenever you had a significant financial sale, you wanted a meal to celebrate it. That this is the way people remembered it, because otherwise people would forget. So it was a meal to create a communal memory, so that people wouldn't forget. And this way it would. So Yaakov was absolutely right, and his parents knew that he bought it. Because what happens after Esav sells the b'chayr for a pot of beans? He's called Edom. Al Kain Karash my Edom. Everyone calls him Edom. Well, if everyone was calling him Edom, why are they calling him Edom? Because everyone knows that he sold the b'chayr.
He messed up.
If everyone knows, then his parents know. Which means his parents know that Yaakov really had the right to b'chayr. Which explains why Rivka was saying, do something, it's yours. And why Yitzchak really agreed at the end. Yitzchak was being formal, giving it to Yitzchak. But we'll leave that for Parshas Talmud. We'll be back one week Parshas Talmud.
When he saw what Esav was, and then when it had happened, he was like, oh, whoops.
So it could be that's Hirsch, the reaction. Okay. I always look forward.
Beautiful. I never heard